and voice. So I should be recording now. So this is Stat 512. Simultaneous with this, there is a distance-based Stat 512, and that's part of the reason I want to record this. But the other reason is that I'll be posting the videos, and you'll be able to download them. So you can look at them again if you've missed something. Now there's another issue, not so much for you, but for the on the board. So I'm going to try an experiment. With a program called Reflector. So I have this iPad here. So that's the iPad. Maybe I'll turn it this way. So my intent is I can go into full screen here. Okay. So when I need to write, we'll see how this works, but I haven't tried it before. A lot of apps you can do this with, but when I flipped it to this mode, let's see. I forget whether it's not there. There are a couple things I wanted to use. What I'm looking for is productivity. Does anyone see that? Oh, here it is, right in front of me. So this is an app, and it's that I can write on. So if I need to write, I can do that, or erase. Now what I'd like to do now is to look at the syllabus. And by the way, in principle at least, everything that I'm doing, including when I switch over to the iPad, is being recorded. So you'll be able to see the equivalent of what I would write on the board. So let me now go into the syllabus. Did everyone get the email I sent? Did some of you just join this class? Okay, then you would not have. And well, I sent them last night, but if some of you switched from section 1 to section 2, did anyone switch from section 1 to section 2? Okay. If you didn't, and you were registered by last night, you should have gotten an email. So you need to look on your Mix account, which is where the email got sent to. Now, the email has a direct link to this. But another way the email has a link that will go directly to the syllabus, and it has a link that will go directly to the schedule. But you can also go to our website, click on Faculty, click on Me, and then you can go down to Stat 512, and this is the syllabus. So I want to discuss the syllabus first, and then I want to discuss the schedule a little bit. The schedule is incomplete, but I'm going to go through it with you today, roughly what we're going to be covering. And then I'm going to start out when I get to the software, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. And I'll probably give some examples, assuming we have time. So my name is Jim Harner, and I'll be teaching this course along with 7B1 and Yan Shin. You want to stand up? She's going to be assisting with this course, and including the online course. So she'll be grading the assignments in this course. I will probably grade the exams though. And she'll be communicating with the distance-based students, although I will do some of that, but she'll be the main person communicating with the distance-based students, or with you if you have a question. And we may have some hours in this room that I'll be talking to her about, where you can come here in the evenings if you need some help. So, if you want to send her an email, that should do it. That's all you have to do. Just click on that link in the course. Again, we'll be announcing office hours for both myself and for Jan shortly. We'll be putting office hours up here. The book we're using is not the book used in section 1. It's Statistics for Research by Dowdy, Weird and Chilco. It's a Wiley book. The last time I looked, they had copies in the bookstore, although they only had 6 copies in the bookstore. Let me come back to the class schedule in just a moment. There's another book, and I'm sorry. They're going to be notes. And, well, let me click on the class schedule just a moment. There's not much here yet. Basically, when I record the lectures, I will be putting them up here as an MPEG here, and I'll be putting the notes, which will be slideshows. So you'll be able to download the video with voice as well as the notes. So you'll pretty much have a replication of what I'm doing in class. The assignments will be given here on the far right, and the topics will be given in the first column with corresponding sections in the book here. So the notes, again, you'll be able to get from the class schedule, as well as the videos. There is another book. It actually has been used in our regression course, but the last part of that book relates to this course. So there are pieces of that book you may want to look at as a supplement to what we're doing. Now, what distinguishes Section 2 from Section 1, besides the fact that this is sort of co-taught with a distance-based? The main difference is that Section 1 uses jump and this uses R. Well, the books are different. So there may be a little bit of difference in terms of the emphasis, but basically the topics taught will be pretty much the same. So this course will use R, the other course will use jump. Now, having said that, I will also pop up some jump stuff to show you, just so you know how to do it in jump. So you might say, well, why R? Isn't jump a lot easier? It's point and click. Well, yes, it's easier, but it's limited. So some of the things that I want to do are not possible in jump. And in particular, it's essentially impossible to do what I call reproducible research. R is a programming language, although in terms of what you're going to be doing, for the most part, it's built-in functions. You don't have to do a lot of programming. But it's essentially unlimited in what you can do. And originally, R was a big thing within university environments. Not so much that it replaced jump, but it replaced, for a lot of people, SAS. So if you go out in industry, what are you going to find? Well, you're going to find all three. Some of the reliability engineers do use Jump. But if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, they mostly use SAS. If you look at the high-tech industries, they mainly use R. How many have heard of the term data science? So data science is an emerging area. Our MPS program, the Master Professional Studies program, we had a name change after 1 year of having the program. It was an MPS in Applied Statistics. It's now called an MPS in Statistical and Data Sciences. So what's the big deal about data sciences? Well, if you haven't heard of data science, you may have heard of data analytics or business intelligence. Those sort of mean the same thing. But basically, data science, I would define it as statistics applied to big data. Now, to be honest, I see data science sort of sitting between statistics or statistical science and computer science. And the reason is because if you become a data scientist, you also have to know, you don't necessarily need to know computer architectures, but you do need to know some computer languages. R is one of the most commonly used ones, however. But generally speaking, you want to go beyond R and learn some other scripting language. So for example, like JavaScript, Python, others. So in particular, as we change the curriculum for our data science program, R becomes an essential tool to learn almost day one. So that's part of the reason that we're going in this direction. So if we're going to use R, what is it? Well, here it is. It runs on essentially every platform. You can download it. There's lots of documentation. So it's r-project.org. If you go there, you simply go to CRAN, which is the Comprehensive R. That's a Comprehensive R archive network. And that will have mirror sites around the world. It's been said that the sun never sets on R because these are mirror sites all around the world. Now, I usually go to CMU since it's the closest. So if you want to download it, you can download for Linux, Mac, and Windows. Now, I should mention that R did start out as a Unix program. Well, let me qualify that a little bit. The predecessor R was S. The S language was a language developed at Bell Labs. Why S? Well, Bell Labs also developed C. Before C, they developed a language B. But I presume it was called S at Bell Labs because S is for statistics. So Bell Labs and Unix in general is known for very short, cryptic ways of expressing things. So it's not surprising they called it S. So in the late 80s, there were a couple guys, Robert Gentleman and Ross Cather, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. They started a language called R, but it originally A ran on the Mac, and B was written in Scheme, which is a Lisp-like, which is an artificial intelligence language. So for the first 6 or 7 years, it ran on the Mac in Scheme. And for those of you that want a little history, There was another language called xlist-stat, which also started on the Mac. It was a Lisp language. Those were two interactive dynamic languages. There was a lot of exciting things happening in the late 80s and the early 90s. But if you know anything about Lisp as a language, there are a lot of parentheses, and most people don't like parentheses. And so they decided to base the code on C for R. I was actually at that conference. It was at Drew University in New Jersey, I forget, 96 or 97. And there was a group of about 40 of us where that decision was made to switch R to a C-based language. However, the way you operate in R is still Lisp-like in many ways. And I'll mention why that's true at various points. At any rate, you can download and install R for Linux, Mac, and Windows. And there are various ways you can run it, but we're going to take the approach of running it. Well, I suggest you might want to download it. If you do, there's something called r.app, which on the Mac you can run this way, and this is the way you run. That's one way to run R. And if you're on the Windows, there's a similar type of program that you can run R. That's one way. There's another way, using RStudio. RStudio is a full screen environment, and I'll come back to it in a minute. This is running locally on my machine. We're going to run this, except we're not necessarily, it's up to you, but we're not necessarily going to run it locally on the machine. We're going to run it off the server. But it looks the same, almost. So this is RStudio. RStudio is a front end to R. That is, it's a front end for programming that's more powerful than r.app. Yeah, that's interesting. So if you go to CRAN, again, you can do this. You can download it, follow the instructions, and install it. Now, some people have trouble doing that, particularly some of the distance-based students. If you're used to, say, Windows, or in fact, if you're used to the Mac and not the Unix side of Mac, then you're used to this graphical interface, and it's not like installing. It may be slightly more difficult than installing a normal program. That's part of the reason that I want to use the server version, because you don't have to install anything. In particular, R is an environment that has a lot of packages, like thousands of packages, to do almost everything conceivable. But they don't all load. You have to load each package. There's a built-in group of packages, but beyond that, you load what you want. And you're probably not going to load thousands of packages, because some of them are rather esoteric and do very specialized types of things. So there are various sort of built-in manuals. The one you might want to look at is this very first one. Let's see. Well, this is what's new. So if you would go to the Mac, for example, you can download it here. And you probably also want to download tools. But again, you can look at your own system, and you don't have to download it and install it on your machine, because you can do everything on our server. Now, once I went to this site, there's something called task views. And just to give you an idea of the extent of R and the reach of R, if you pick an area, and there are a lot of areas mentioned, they group packages by area. So for example, if you were interested in finance, everything that's highlighted in blue is a package to do something in finance, and this is a list of them all. So you can see that there are a lot of packages going for risk management, etc., in finance. And the other thing, of course, is this is all free, which is nice. So, if you're interested in genetics, again, there are quite a few packages: phylogenetics, population genetics, etc., linkage analysis, and so on. So all of these areas, if you're interested in machine learning, these are packages that are commonly used. But R also has interfaces to almost everything else, or other programs have interfaces to R. So for example, I believe both JUMP and SAS can call R functions. But R can also connect to almost every other system. And certainly they can be format compatible with other systems, even if those other systems use binary files. So at any rate, we're going to be using R. But what I would recommend that you download, well, you need to download the basic R. But I would also recommend that you consider downloading RStudio. So RStudio is what's called an IDE. Does anyone know what IDE stands for?
Yeah. Integrated Development Environment.
Yeah, it's an integrated development environment. As such, it's very powerful. We won't be using R at that high level for the most part. We won't be using a lot of the developer tools in R because mostly you just get handed stuff and you use it. However, if you take the next course, the next hour, Stat 523, you will use far more features of the IDE. So you can download the IDE for R here and install it. However, this is R running inside a web browser. You can run it inside whatever browser you want, Google Chrome. I probably wouldn't recommend Explorer, because there are certain technologies that are not in Explorer that you may need. So I would recommend either Safari, Firefox, or Chrome. Okay, I'm going to expand this to full screen, which I recommend doing. That menu in the top is still there. You just have to slide your, likewise. But actually, what you need, and once you're running R, are these. You may want other tabs. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. So how do you sign into RStudio.stat.wvu.edu? You need an account on our servers. Now our main server is stat.wvu.edu, and we have several subsidiary servers. This one is called RStudio.stat.wvu.edu. So, and again, I'm not expecting you to do this, but another way to get into R is, this is a terminal. It's a command line. It's a Unix command line. So I could type R, and I'm in R. By the way, everything in R is a function. So when you quit R, it's Q for quit with parentheses. It's a function because there are arguments to the function. So I'm going to quit R, save workspace, no. But how do you get into our server? Well, you're going to get an account. You're going to have an account name. And depending upon whether you want a graphical interface or not, you can do what's called SSH. And then in my case, J. Harner is my account name. So I'm going to go into here, and I can actually go into stat. We have R on both stat, the main server, as well as on RStudio server. So I could just say stat.wvu.edu, and you have to put a password in. And then now I'm running R on the server, not locally. But you don't have to do it this way. You can simply use RStudio. But you do need an account. Therefore, if you look at my email, I said to email Steve Giesler. So you need to look at your Mix account, look at that email, and email Steve Giesler and say you need an account for RStat systems. That gets you an account not only on RStudio, but it gets you on a regular server. You have access not only to R, but to SAS, and a lot of other things. So once you have that account, you have it for whatever courses you take in our department, or if you're a major, you have it during the time you're a major, and usually you have it for a period after you've left here even. So you can use things like SAS remotely. So again, you don't have to use a terminal, of course. You can use RStudio. But you still need a login to get into RStudio because RStudio is on one of our servers. So therefore, read your email from Mix. That's how I'll be corresponding with you through your Mix account, because I can send it to the whole class. So if people get added, people drop, that's supposed to keep up to date. If you did not get the email because you added a course after I sent the emails, I'm going to send it again with probably additional information on it. But one of the things in that email says, this is the actual email. This is the link to the syllabus, this is the link to the schedule of classes, and this is the note to Steve Giesler. Steve G at AS for Arts and Sciences, .wvu.edu. Okay, and this is the link to RStudio. So that was actually the contents of the email. The one I sent to the distance-based class is slightly different. So if you go into your Mix account, you should be able to see this email. So you need to kind of get two things straight. If you're not used to Mix, you need to learn how to use Mix, because you're going to need that for all your courses. But you should be a little bit used to Mix, because you probably went into Mixed as a step in the registration process. So the reason I had to exit twice was because I had to exit from the server, and then it came back to the local machine. I had to exit from it. Now, the R manual is a PDF, And this is one way you can sort of learn R, but it's written more as a manual than as an instruction. In other words, it's not designed for introductory students to teach them R. It's more of a reference manual. So I'll be putting up on the website a simpler type. I'm sort of looking at various things. There are various books you can buy. But I'll be looking at simpler free things that might be available that you can look at to help learn R. But again, in this class, you don't have to learn a lot of R. Basically, if you look at my examples, you typically will use the same functions on different data. So in other words, you'll take the same type of functions that I use, and you'll just make some changes to it to run it on new data sets. The key thing here is not so much that you're going to learn a lot of R. It is an introduction to R. It's that we're doing statistics. So you should be able to apply R to a new situation. But again, if you look at my examples in my notes, then you should be able to do it without a problem. So again, if you look at this book, I view this more as a reference book when I forget something. But quite frankly, I don't usually use it that way because there's an extensive help system within R, which I'll show you in a minute. I may have killed RStudio, but we'll come back to it. Okay. Now, I mentioned these LaTeX references, and LaTeX is a mathematical typesetting system. And the last time I taught this course, which was a few years ago, we actually used LaTeX. It's extremely powerful, and if you're writing a book or you're doing a project, or if you're a stat student, you should know it. However, it turns out that LaTeX, it beautifully typesets mathematics. You can embed R in it so that it becomes a document with embedded code, so that you see the results of running R, or you see the code, or both, or neither, depending on what you're doing, in your final, say, PDF output. But the problem is that LaTeX has a bit of a steep, R has a bit of a learning curve, although we're going to kind of be at the low end of it in this course. But so does LaTeX. And so I was looking for a solution of how do you say you have a homework, how do you give your homework to me? Well, I don't want paper. I want it electronically. So how would you think you would do it? Yeah.
Text file of our source code.
What now?
Text file of our source code.
Yeah, but suppose you have to kind of explain the output. And then not only that, I want to see the output.
Workspace image.
Okay, well, yes, you could do it with comments. At least you could explain it, but then, there would be a question of running the code, and so you'd actually have to give me two files. You'd have to give me the text file, which has the code, plus you'd have to give me some output file. Or maybe not. So I have these books here, but I'm going to use LaTeX in terms of my slides, but it is not my intent for you to have to learn LaTeX. So if you have some sort of presentation way of doing it, not PowerPoint. In fact, I don't use PowerPoint in my slides. I use LaTeX. But it creates PDFs. So it's a PDF slideshow. So what way do you know to write documents? What would you use? Why not? LaTeX? Yeah, you maybe, but Rest of you, what would you use? What now? You'd probably use Word, right? One little problem. Can anyone think of the problem with using Word? Well, first of all, it's not so simple to get executable code within Word that actually executes and gives the results within Word. So what do? You'd cut and paste, right? Now you find a mistake. Then you have to go back and recut and paste everything. Becomes a nightmare. Not the way to do it. So if Word is not the way to do it, it's not reproducible. If you find errors in your code, you have to go back and essentially recut and paste everything. It's not automatically formatted, at least in a statistical way of speaking. So there are so many negatives against Word, and LaTeX is hard. So what should we use? Well, you suggested maybe we just use code, and you could send me code and I could execute your code and see if it works. But there's a better way. Now I said that you could embed R within LaTeX, and there's an environment called sweave. And what sweave does is it actually takes the document, sends it to R, executes it, and it's a markup language, LaTeX is, so it forms markups for the inputs and outputs, and with all the other LaTeX markup, and then you convert it to a PDF. It's all automatic. It's like one click. That's one click in RStudio, but you still have to know LaTeX. Well, does anyone know who John Gruber is? He's a blogger. He actually makes a lot of money blogging. But he's also a programmer. So he wanted a solution to this problem. He wanted a simple blogging language, but he wanted it to be extremely flexible. And the default output is not PDF, it's HTML. In other words, a web page. So he created this markup language called Markdown. Markdown is extremely simple. You can learn it in 20 minutes. It's not nearly as powerful as LaTeX. But there are two little things you can do with it. You can embed equations in it using LaTeX, but you only have to learn the equations. And you won't need to do that hardly at all, if any, in the assignments. But you can also embed R in it. And since then, there have been many extensions of Markdown, or what's called multi-Markdown, that got harder. But RStudio has their own version of Markdown that makes it extremely simple. So, if we look at RStudio, and you look under RStudio Docs. I'm sorry, I want RStudio Docs. So if I look at RStudio Docs, this is LaTeX oriented. This is Markdown oriented. So you can get some basic ideas. But the point is Markdown, it literally is a text file. But it's much easier to learn than Microsoft Word. And it's more powerful in the sense that you can embed R code in it as well as mathematical expressions and so forth. So here you have equations in R Markdown, using R Markdown. So you see it's sort of like this. Your header 1 is a high-level header, and you underscore it. And then you just type text, italics, and bold. You put asterisks around it. You create list with a dash, and then you put code in these 3 backticks, and so forth. There are only a few things you have to learn. This is the output. Okay. Now it doesn't have code, but again, it's very easy. On Wednesday's lecture, I'm going to show you how to do this with this simple document embedding RCode. So once you create a PDF file, all you really have to do to send me the homework is send me the markdown file, because I can just click on it and create a PDF. And if it doesn't create a PDF, you have a problem. But it's trivial. So, again, before I get too carried away, keep going back to this for some reason. These are the technologies we're going to be using. So let's talk a little bit about some other aspects of the course. Exams, makeups, attendance, and so forth. Okay, the exams. There'll be two, a midterm and a final. And there'll be assignments worth 200 points. The midterm will be worth 150, and the final will be worth 200. So there'll be two exams, and not sure whether I'm going to have probably 5 assignments worth 40 points each, scattered throughout the class. The assignments will be graded. You can talk with other people about the assignments. But if I get 2 documents that look the same, I'm not going to be happy. I want you to do your own work, but I'm not naive enough to think you're not going to talk necessarily about it with someone. But it needs to be your own work, and of course what I prefer you to do is talk with the TA in this class. If you want to use our facilities, this room will be open quite a bit at night. It won't be just for this course, it'll be an open lab in the evenings. In fact, it's open most of the day. Whenever there's not a class in here, you can come in and use this lab, and it's kept open all day. But we're also going to keep it open in the evenings, perhaps even a little bit on Saturday and or Sunday. So, you're allowed to bring a legal copy of the book to the exam. By a legal copy, I mean a hard copy of the book. Not a Xerox copy of the book, not an ebook version of the book, because there is no legal ebook version of the book. But if you don't have a book, and that's up to you whether you buy it, you can still bring on the midterm 1 page of notes front and back, which is really enough. People get very creative how they fill that front and back up. You can get a lot on 1 page front and back. And there's some advantage of doing that because it's an effective way of studying in that it's an effective way of studying in that you organize your thoughts and you put down raw material, perhaps even some examples. On the final, you can bring 2 pages front and back. You can take your midterm page and add another to it, or you can do 2 new ones, I don't care. So those are sort of the rules for the exams. Attendance will not be taken. Even though I record the lectures, I would recommend that you do attend. But I am trying to make them so that they are self-contained, because the distance-based students probably will not be able to attend, although if they want to stop by in a nearby Morgantown, they could. You should know basic statistics, Stat 511 or the equivalent, although we're going to review some of the material. And, of course, you should read the statements on social justice and academic honesty. And that, again, refers to the homework, too, that you need to make sure that your homeworks are not just a direct copy. Are there any questions on the syllabus? So I'll be filling this in. This week, we are going to be doing some basic skills, although I don't have a whole lot of time left today, but on Thursday we're also going to use basic skills. My idea is to mainly teach R and Markdown within the context of teaching statistics, so you'll sort of gradually learn it. But you're going to have plenty of examples and you can reproduce them. That is, once I give you an example with Markdown, you can take that Markdown and play with it and make sure you can execute it. The key thing to remember is now you need an account. So you need to email Steve Giesler. So let me quickly show you what we're going to cover, and then I'm going to go back to RStudio a little bit. You might also want to consider getting a Dropbox account. Does any of you have Dropbox accounts? Well, if you don't, you should, because you get a couple of gigabytes for free. And the way Dropbox works is you have a local copy, but it not only backs it up on a server, but it has some level of version control. So you can actually go back to old version. If you accidentally deleted something, it's, oh no, you can actually go back to a previous version and recover it. You can share Dropboxes with other people, and you also have a public Dropbox. You can also interface with Dropbox from R. In the other course, we may do this, where you actually have an API that you can actually interface to Dropbox from within R. So in other words, programmatically writing code, you can pull stuff out of Dropbox and use it. This is pretty cool. Dropbox is free, and what I like about it is everything in Dropbox is always with me, because this is always with me. This is often with me. It's everywhere. Every account, every device I have, it's there. Now, I don't have everything in Dropbox. I haven't quite taken that step yet, but now I should mention that I'm writing a package. Well, this is actually the book you're going to buy, but I'm actually coming in on the book and converting it from sort of a hand calculation type book to a R-based book, R and SAS-based book. So the new title of the book will be something like Statistics for Research using R and SAS. And this is it. It's all in LaTeX. And I just wanted to briefly go through to show you what we'll be covering this semester. So the first 7 chapters, well, technically it should be the first 9 or 10 chapters would be Stat 511. However, I found out when I've taught this class before that people really don't know things like the t-test, the 2-sample t-test, and so forth all that well, and they don't know it in R at any rate. So we're actually going to start on 8, but 8 and 9, which should be review. 8 is on students' t-distribution, a 1-sample t-test, a 2-sample t-test, a paired t-test, etc. That's in Chapter 8, but because you're supposed to have some introductory statistics, we're going to go a little bit fast through this chapter. Although I may go a little bit slower since you're also going to sort of be honing your R skills at this time. Now, today, if I have time, but on Thursday, I'm actually going to be taking some examples out of these early chapters which is something that you might have learned, or hopefully have learned in Stat 511, that gets more into probability distributions and things of that sort. So if you don't know what a binomial distribution is, you might want to look at that chapter. Now, one of the things that you'll note is that here is a plot in the book, and this is the code to create the plot. So in other words, almost all the graphics in this book I'm creating using R code. Now this is actually some SAS code for doing the same thing. So now I may do one more thing. I don't know yet. I'm thinking about it. When you're doing LaTeX and creating a book like this, you can put in hyperlinks, not only within the book. I mean, this is a hyperlink. The fact that I could jump from here to here is a hyperlink. But you can also have a hyperlink to something external. And I thought about having a hyperlink to what's called a jump script. So what is a jump script? I said that jump is point and click. So you can point and click and do things, but you can also save a script, which is a recording of what you've done. So you can actually reproduce it that way with a script. It's a specific scripting language to jump. It's not a more general scripting language. It's a jump scripting language. But it allows you to actually save your mouse movements so that you can actually run a script that reproduces your mouse movements, including the output. So in principle, I could have a link that you click on. It goes to some server and downloads the jump script to do it. Sort of the same thing that I might do with R code or SAS code. But you're far more limited, again, than either SAS or R. But again, it's a way of sort of recording what you did in jump. But you, generally speaking, don't go in and edit it. It's not so amenable to that. So it's not a true scripting language in the way I like to think about it, because if you had to change something, you'd probably have to go in and do it with the mouse again and then re-record the script. Okay, so we're going to start out, other than this week where we sort of get introduced, and I'm going to do some of the examples from these earlier chapters using some R code. We'll start out with the with chapter 8, and then we'll actually move to chapter 9, which is simple linear regression. Just simple linear regression. Again, you may have had this, but again, I'm going to review it and show you how to do it within the context of R. Then you go into basic one-way analysis of variance. Again, you may or may not have had that. By the way, a lot of these chapters, so this chapter, for example, on the t-test, in addition to having inference about a single mean and about two means, also about two variances, you also have the corresponding non-parametric test. I probably will not have time to do the non-parametric test. We have a separate course, Stat 551, on non-parametric statistics, if you're interested in taking it. I don't think there'll be time to do that. So this next chapter is on simple linear regression, chapter 9, and chapter 10 is the one-way analysis of variance. So again, at this point, fewer of you may have had it. And then we get into some other aspects of the one-way analysis of variance in chapter 11. Now, this is where things differ a little bit from what you're going to see here. Chapter 12 in the book is this big book, and it covers two topics, really. It covers factorial experiments and experimental design. Both very important topics. If I have two treatments, factorial designs tell you how they are related to each other. Are they crossed or nested? You're going to ask some other questions. Are they random or fixed? And you'll learn what all this means. But if two factors are crossed, if you have A with 3 levels and B with 3 levels, then you have like a 3x3 table. If A represents the rows and B represents the columns, you would have 9 cells, but there's a certain structure to this. And this structure is laid out by the relationships of the two factors or two treatments relative to each other. But in other cases, we can have nesting. So, in other words, when we talk about factorial experiments, we're going to talk about how the treatments are related to each other. Experimental design is primarily about how we control variation. If you're running an experiment, you need to make sure that you control variation. Otherwise, you have too much noise that drowns the signal. That what you're interested in, you can't find because there's too much noise in the system. So the experimental design deals with, well, how do I control variation in my experiment? Now, of course, if you have an observational study, you're kind of out of luck because an observational study is something you observe. You can't control. So you can only control variation if there's a physical way of doing that. So not all studies can be controlled. Well, chapter 12 in the book contains both of those topics, but now they're being split out as two different topics. So chapter 13 in the book is actually the analysis of covariance. And then there's another chapter or so in the book. The last chapter in the book deals with multiple regression. And it also contains a little bit on logistic regression. So in other words, 12 as actually factorial experiments and design. 13 is, in the book, is covariance analysis, which sort of combines regression with the analysis of variance. And then the last chapter in the book primarily deals with multiple regression. So that will comprise the topics. As far as the book is concerned, the biggest chapter by far is chapter 12. It's part of the reason I'm splitting it apart. So that's what we'll be covering. Are there any questions on that? Now, I can't give you this version, but what I am going to give you, as I write code, I'm going to incorporate those into the notes or in the scripts that I will give you. The current version of the book, and this had to do with the co-authors, particularly the first co-author, the first two co-authors, had the philosophy that you should be able to do everything by hand. There's a little bit of a problem with that. That works up through maybe chapter 11. Even there, it can get tedious. As soon as you hit chapter 12, doing it by hand is really not something you want to do. Okay, so therefore, and it's not only something you don't want to do, you can only do it in the simplest cases. So if you have a two-way analysis of variance, remember I talked about where you have 3 rows and 3 columns, you have 9 cells, and you have observations in each of those cells. So if you look at the first level of A with the first level of B, that's a cell, right? And maybe you have 3 observations there. If you look at the first level of A and the second level of B, maybe you have 3 observations there and so forth. If you had 3 in all 9 cells, that's called a balanced design. No problem, you can do that by hand. But suppose you don't have the same number of observations in each cell. Then doing it by hand becomes a nightmare, even for the simple case of a 2-factor experiment. And so you essentially can't do it by hand, where you wouldn't want to do it, for what are called unbalanced designs. And most data I encounter is not balanced. If it's an observational study, I can guarantee you it won't be balanced. You understand the distinction between an observational study and a... You can go to the first part of the book, maybe chapter 1. Let's see if this is a... By the way, you should sort of skim through this. There's a nice discussion on the scientific method. I'm amazed at how many scientists I meet that have no clue what the scientific method is. Statistics in a wheeze with it. This is sort of each step of the scientific method, and it talks about where statistics enters into it. State the problem, formulate the hypothesis, design. Where did I miss it? Design the experimental survey. How do you do that? Well, that, as you will see, designing an experiment may not be a trivial thing. Make observations, interpret the data. Of course, that implies you've done an analysis, and so forth. But this is talking about experimental data, survey data, and big data. By the way, big data, it's not really big. There are different types of data that are, I mean, how would you analyze the data from Facebook? It's not in nice little rows and columns, is it? It's in a network. So it's a different type of data. It's called network data. So anyway, you might want to look over these first chapters. I'm going to be giving some examples from them. I think I keep losing RStudio. So basically we're doing from chapter 8, the second half of the book, from chapter 8 through 14. More or less sequentially. That will, in other words, the schedule will sort of start filling that in. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take me to do certain topics, so I may not fill it to the bottom. I may sort of fill the schedule in chunks as I get estimates of how long it's going to take. The midterm will be approximately in the middle of the semester. So any questions about the syllabus, the schedule? You need to get an account. Let me see if I can just give you, I want to show you just a little bit about RStudio. I removed the tabs to give myself more space. RStudio is organized into 4 panels. You can rearrange the panels. If you bring it up, when you sign in for the first time, it won't look like this because I kind of rearranged it according to what I like. If you go into Tools under, Options, okay. There's something called Pane Layout, and this tells you how you lay out these 4 quadrants. This is where I code. This is the output. This, I'm putting workspaces files. You can put whatever you want once you see it. Over here, I put my plots and my history. Now, you can configure R in various ways once you learn it a little bit better. But you notice these little icons up here? If I click here and here, I simply have 2 panels, although the other 2 are down here. This is for coding. This is a console. A console, what can I do there? Well, 1 plus 1. Oh, that's not a 1. I hit an exclamation point. Let me try that again. 1 plus 1. So R can be used as a calculator. Right now, I'm not even using, this is a file I'm going to create that has R code. So I can, like if you have a homework, you'll have a homework file. And you'll sort of keep adding stuff to it as you do your homework. And you save it. Then when you come back, you have everything you saved and you can add more things to it. Correct errors, etc. But if you just want to interactively play with R, you use the console. So at any rate, so I could say X gets C, which means collects 1, 3, 4, 2, 6, 7, 5, let's say. And so I've created a vector X. That's a vector. It's data, sort of. I mean, not here. I mean, it's just. So I could then say I want the mean of X. That's the mean. I could say I want a histogram of X. There's the histogram. Now, usually then when I'm doing a histogram, I'll do it. Now, of course, that histogram is not very interesting, but you can see how easy it is to do it. So again, there are various ways that we can do it. I can split screens. I can make it all this. I can make it all that. You can play with these to sort of figure it out. By default, I usually work this way as I'm developing something over here. So let me just show you an example of something over here. And as a concept, how much time do I have? 2 minutes. Not much time. Again, I'll do this in more detail next time. I'm going to go to courses. This is a directory structure, and I have under courses, I want to go to home. Home is what's called my home account on the server. And then I'm going to go to courses, and then I'm going to go to Stat 512. And I'll look under R code, and let me look at chapter 1. I have random.r. That's what's called an R script. If I click on that, it goes up above. Now I want to do one more thing. You have a home directory, which is, you log in, you're in your home directory. But R and Unix have a concept of a working directory. So generally speaking, I want to change my working directory to be the same directory. I'm now in a directory called chapter, which is in R code, which is in 512, which is in courses, which is home. I will show you how to create those types of directories next time. You can create the directories right here in RStudio. You do not have to go to a terminal. You can do it where it says new folder. And you create a file up here. Under file, you can create a new file. What kind of files can you create? You can create an R script, text file, a C code. This is a LaTeX file. This is a Markdown file. This is an HTML file, and what's called a documentation file. So there are a lot of different files you can create. But you can't create a Word file, although you could create a text file that you export to Word. So I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to set the working directory to the directory that contains this file. I'll explain why later. This up here, the console says, in this top line, it says my working directory is chapter 1 within R code within Stat 512, within courses within my home directory. The tilde represents my home directory. So suppose I want to execute this code. So I can't execute it. So if I click on run, it executes that line. So I created a variable y. rnorm means I want to generate 100 normal random variables with a mean of 10 and standard deviation of 2. So I just generated 100 observations from a normal distribution with a mean of 100, 10, and a standard deviation of 2. And now I'm going to compute the mean. Now the mean is actually 10.16. Why is it not 10? I have a sample of 100. It's close to 10. 10 is the theoretical mean. I sample from that distribution 100, and I compute the mean of the 100. Hopefully it's going to be close to 10, and it is. And I said the standard deviation is what? 2? So let's see what the standard deviation is. So now notice these are the mean computes the mean of y. Y is a vector that I created randomly with a certain mean of 10 and standard deviation of 2, and I computed the mean of standard deviation. Let's do it. The hash is a comment. Now I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to actually select this. That's actually all one command, although you can step through it, and I'll show you both ways later. So now I'm going to create a histogram. There's my histogram. But I'm going to do something else. I'm actually going to superimpose a normal curve. I'm going to superimpose the normal curve that has a mean, attendance, standard deviation too, on top of that histogram. So this took my 100 observations and put them into a histogram. And now I'm going to create x, and that's just a variable. That's an x variable I need to plot this from 2. Notice this goes from 2 to 18. So I'm creating x from 2 to 18. And I'm sort of doing it 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 up to 18. Again, I'll explain all these more in detail. And then I'm going to plot the curve. And notice the curve. And now let's go up to full screen. That's the output. So in other words, theoretical, the curve is smooth. This is my sample of 100. Now, if I did it again, would I get the same histogram? No. There is a way I can make it the same. I can set the seed so it freezes what, in fact, the random numbers are always the same. But I didn't set the seed. So if I went back in and did it again, you would get it as. So you could run through this code several times, and each time, this smooth curve is the same, right? Because it's the theoretical curve I'm sampling from. But the actual histogram, will change a little bit each time because you're getting new random samples. Does that make sense? Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. So between now and Wednesday, if at all possible, get an account. So email Steve Giesler. Are there any other questions? So at any rate, this is the environment we're going to use. If I would have made any changes here, I simply would have saved it. I can save it, but I don't. It's actually, I didn't make any changes, but you can also take shortcuts. I can hit Command Save, and it would save it. So depending on your operating system, you can save it with keystrokes, or you can save it using the menu. So that's sort of the gist of where we're going. We're going to get, next time I'm going to look at some more examples from the first part of the book, partly as a review, in case you don't remember what the binomial distribution is, and partly to learn R. Yes?
How much data can R cope with? Like the limit?
Okay. In the standard way R does things, it's in memory. So if you've got gigabytes, you can do gigabytes. However, there are lots of ways of getting around that problem. If you've got big data, I mean, R is used as one of the principal tools of big data. And the way you get around with it, there are various ways you can get around the limitation of in memory. And you can also, not only that, you can also, there are packages that allow you to have essentially infinite precision arithmetic. So for example, we wrote a package on kth nearest neighbor, and we wrote it not only to handle big data, but to handle very, very accurately. So essentially every problem that has been found in R, because when R was developed, depending on your point of view, either the late 80s or the mid to late 90s, big data wasn't so common then. Now, SAS, which was developed in the late 60s, effectively everything you do in SAS can be quite large because it doesn't assume that it has to fit in memory. So you might ask, well, why did SAS do that? Well, back in the late 60s, there wasn't a lot of memory, even on mainframes. And so they had to be efficient. So that turned out to actually be very good, because now SAS is very good for big data without doing anything special. But there are ways to do it in R. Any other questions?
We haven't taken this class before, but it's be difficult for us to take like 523.
No, because 523 is mainly about programming. I'm letting people sort of simultaneously take this and 523. In fact, if you're interested in R, I would recommend it. 523, the book is called R Programming for Bioinformatics, but it doesn't really require a lot of knowledge of bioinformatics, that is biology. That is to say, what you'll need will be in the book. It also doesn't do a lot of statistics, so I think you'll be okay. Any other? You may need to get permission to get in it, so you may need to go see Wendy or email Wendy so she can open it up to you. 523 also has an online version. Any other questions? Okay. I'll see you Wednesday.